Okay, so after looking into couple of practical examples like a simple hello world MCP, API integration, creating a to-do manager, and creating the MCP server for reading the image metadata, text summarization. So we have done good amount of practical so far. Now it's a time for understanding how this MCP flow works under the hood. So there are four different phases associated when the MCP server is getting executed from any of the AI tool. So the first phase is startup and discovery. So we are taking the example of cursor. So cursor connects, it discovers and lists the tools, and it receives the schemas. And second phase is request in planning. So for example, user enters the prompt, that is the associated LLM with the AI tool. So LLM decides the tool usage, which tool to actually figure out. The tool invocation happens. So in this case, cursor AI chat will send a JSON RPC call, and the MCP server then executes the tool that we had defined in it. Fourth is after execution, the reasoning and formatting happens. So LLM processes the response that is returned by the MCP server after executing that tool. So LLM processes the result. Cursor then shows the final answer based on the result that is formatted. So these are the four different phases involved when any MCP server is getting executed. Which are the key roles who are involved in this entire life cycle? So first is user, who provides prompt or structured request, who is willing to execute that MCP server tool. The cursor AI tool is a client for MCP, and again it is an orchestrator, but it is not an executor. So this is very important point. Cursor AI is MCP client, is playing the role of orchestrator, but it doesn't execute it. Then comes the MCP server, who is the actual executor of the logic that is written under the MCP tool in the MCP server. And under the hood, LLM, which is understanding the natural language based on the prompt, performs the very important part of mapping the tool based on the configuration that we have done. So these are the different roles that are associated during the MCP flow. Now, how the communication, how the transport mechanism is executed. So we need to understand that MCP is a protocol, and it uses the JSON over standard input output transport mechanism, which is the mechanism that we are using so far in our practical examples. What are the benefits? The benefits are it is lightweight, it is universal, and it is language agnostic. Then MCP server, who is involved in executing the actual logic during this transport mechanism. If we look into standard input output, it is the easy integration with editors like Cursor. No network setup needed for the local development for practicing the examples, and it works across programming languages. This is the JSON RPC example. So the first part is this JSON RPC message. So it has just JSON RPC version, the ID, the invocation is done for the tools and list, and the parameters if any. And this RPC message has the response as below, that it is using JSON RPC 2.0, ID is 1, and then it returns the response that okay, based on the prompt, the JSON RPC message it was sent has identified the tools called summarize. We have executed the text summarizer. So in this case, the summarize uh, tool was identified and the parameters were associated with it, right? Now, this is very important diagram for understanding that how cursor plus MCP and the LLM orchestrates the tools. So the first part is user performs the configuration server in the MCP JSON into the cursor ID client. The LLM chat model is involved, and MCP server, which is the tool that we have created inside the MCP server, are involved in the startup and discovery. The second step is initialization or handshake. Then, after the initialization is done, the tools listing step is performed. And in this case, tool schemas example summarize were identified during the previous example. The second phase is request and planning. So the prompt comes into the picture. For example, the user enters the prompt, summarize this text, right, with additional context. Then the decision is taken for the identification of the tool based on the prompt that the user has entered, right, along with the parameters identification. Then the tool invocation happens, right, as the sixth step. And once the tool call is performed along with the inputs identification done, the reasoning and formatting is happening, right, by the LLM. And then the response is passed to the LLM again. And finally, the transport via MCP, the JSON over stdio happens, and the response is returned to the user in a well formatted manner. So this way we understood that in background how the communication happens with stdio, the transport mechanism, and the JSON RPC is being used for performing the message transfers, and how the different actors like user, the actual cursor IDE, the LLM chat model, which is part of the cursor IDE chat, and the MCP server that is configured, comes into the picture in different phases of startup and discovery, request planning, tools invocation, and finally the reason and formatting, and how the transport happens via stdio. I hope you have understood the actual mechanism, how the cursor and the MCP actually works together, right? Thank you for staying so far. We will focus on another practical examples coming ahead. Thank you very much.